Introduction. The words of a forgotten warrior. The smoke-laden council chamber of the Velaxi High Command buzzed with impatient murmurs. Ornately dressed strategists whispered to one another, their shimmering exoskeletal plates clicking faintly in the low light. Overhead, holographic charts displayed the routes of fleets, each line of vein-pumping soldiers and weapons toward the conflict that loomed on the horizon. Standing apart from the huddle of generals was an aged Velaxian, his once glorious carapace dulled and chipped from centuries of wear. His right mandible trembled with an old injury that had never healed properly. The scars on his thorax were a lattice of memories from a war fought long before many in the room had even hatched. General Czar's voice cut through the murmurs, rough as gravel yet firm. You all forget too easily. We fought them once before. We barely survived. A younger strategist, her armor polished to a blinding gleam, scoffed. With respect, General Czar, that was over 200 planetary cycles ago. Our forces have evolved. We have newer technology, larger fleets, and superior numbers. Czar's multifaceted eyes narrowed. Your numbers will mean nothing. Your weapons will mean nothing. The humans do not fight for dominance or territory. They fight for survival, and they excel at it. I stood on the fields of Kaldros Prime, my claws slick with ichor, and watched them burn the sky to deny us victory. Entire cities turned to ash. Their own cities. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Do you think your strategies, your neat little formations, will intimidate a species willing to set their own worlds ablaze if it means denying you? The room fell silent. Czar could almost hear the hum of the oxygen recyclers as his peers exchanged uneasy glances. A diplomat finally broke the silence. The humans are scattered, weak. Their homeworld is recovering from ecological collapse, and their colonies are isolated. They are no threat. Czar turned to face her, his mandibles clicking ominously. That is what we thought last time. The High Command dismissed his warnings as the ramblings of an old soldier stuck in the past. They would come to regret it. The Velaxian fleets surged across the void, certain of their victory. Czar's words faded into obscurity, overshadowed by the promise of conquest. But in the cold depths of space, on the edge of humanity's reach, echoes of old wars stirred, and the humans remembered. Chapter 1. A Shadow Awakens. The Velaxi Assault began with precision strikes. They chose remote human colonies first, isolated outposts with limited defenses. The attacks were swift and brutal. Entire settlements were reduced to molten slag before distress signals could even breach the communications blockade. To the Velaxians, it was an effortless demonstration of their superiority. On the edge of Velaxian-controlled space, the observation deck of the flagship Voruses offered a breathtaking view of the latest conquest. The charred remains of Caliban III, its atmosphere a swirling cloud of ash. Strategist Cal Vrek leaned back in his chair, mandibles twitching in satisfaction as the final transmission from the colony looped on the display. Please, if anyone can hear this there. Static consumed the voice, cutting off the panic mid-sentence. Cal Vrek turned to his subordinates, his tone smug. Humans as fragile and chaotic as ever. They crumble like insects before a storm. One of his aides, younger and eager to please, chirped in agreement. Their scattered colonies are little more than an annoyance, strategist. The High Command will have the entire sector under control within 2 cycles. Indeed, Cal Vrek replied. Their legendary resilience has proven to be nothing more than a myth, but in the silence that followed, faint static crackled through the speakers. It was dismissed as a lingering glitch until it spoke. A human voice, cold and resolute, cut through the static. "This is Commander Victoria Hale of the UNSC Resolute, to the Velaxian fleet in orbit above Caliban 3. You have 10 minutes to leave the system, or we will respond with extreme prejudice." The room froze. Calvrek's mandibles twitched, his multifaceted eyes narrowing. "Trace that signal. Now." The technicians scrambled, their appendages dancing over control panels. Within moments, they found the source, a human warship approaching from the edge of the system, moving fast. Too fast. The Resolute wasn't broadcasting its full size or armament. It was small by Velaxian standards, but it was coming straight for them. Calvrek's confidence wavered. A single ship? They're bluffing. The first strike. The Resolute broke from its warp drive in a burst of blue light, engines screaming as it accelerated toward the Velaxian fleet. Its sleek, angular design was a sharp contrast to the organic curves of Velaxian ships. Hale stood on the bridge, arms crossed, her face a mask of calm determination. Her crew worked in synchronized efficiency, each command executed without hesitation. "They've deployed interceptors," her tactical officer announced, voice steady. Hale nodded. "As expected. Launch drones, Pattern Omega. Focus fire on their command ship." Outside the Resolute, hundreds of autonomous drones spilled forth, maneuvering like a swarm of angry hornets. The Velaxian interceptors moved to engage, but the drones were faster, darting between defensive formations to target weak points in the ship's hulls. Explosions blossomed in the void as Velaxian craft were torn apart. On the bridge of the Vorsis, Calvrek watched the chaos unfold. Impossible. Their technology was primitive. This is not primitive. A signal officer turned to him, panic evident in her clicks. "The humans have adapted," strategist. "These tactics, they're designed to counter ours." Calvrek's mind raced. Adaptation, that word haunted him. It was a hallmark of the human species, the thing they had so carelessly dismissed. Humans learned. They improvised. And now, it seemed, they were ready for a fight. An old warning revisited, in the heart of Velaxian space. General Zar sat in his dimly lit quarters, a glass of fermented nectar in his clawed hand. The reports from the front lines had begun trickling in, each one more alarming than the last. He stared at the holographic map where red icons, representing human forces, were starting to appear in alarming numbers. His communicator chirped. Zar activated it, revealing the strained face of Calvrek. "General Zar, I need your counsel." Zar's mandibles twitched in grim satisfaction. "The humans have responded, haven't they?" Calvrek's silence spoke volumes. "You ignored me," Zar continued. "You assumed they were weak. You never considered that every colony you burned was not the end of their story, but the beginning of their vengeance. They've destroyed 2 of our fleets," Calvrek admitted. "Their ships are smaller, but their precision. They don't need to overpower you," Zar interrupted. "They just need to outthink you. Tell me, strategist, have you noticed their patterns yet? The way they strike where you are weakest." Calvrek's hesitation was answer enough. Zar leaned closer to the communicator, his voice a low growl. "You've woken the human war machine, and once it starts, it does not stop." As the Resolute maneuvered through the remnants of the Velaxian fleet, Hale gave the order to broadcast another message. This time, her tone carried a sharp edge of defiance. "To the Velaxian High Command, you thought we were scattered and weak, but you should have listened to your veterans. We remember the last war, and we've learned, across human space, colonies rallied. Old warships were dragged from mothballs and civilians volunteered in droves. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had something the Velaxians could never understand: hope. Chapter 2: The Human Counteroffensive. The Velaxian fleets retreated from their initial conquests, regrouping in fortified positions along the edges of contested space. High Command, shaken by the unexpected losses, convened an emergency summit. The ornate chamber, usually a place of pomp and ritual, now buzzed with desperation. Strategist Calvrek stood at the center of the room, his mandibles trembling as he delivered his report. Their tactics are unconventional. They attack supply lines, communications hubs, and vulnerable patrols. They destroy our assets with surgical precision and vanish before reinforcements can respond. A younger general slammed his clawed hand against the table, his eyes blazing with anger. How can a species as disorganized as the humans coordinate strikes of this magnitude? Their colonies were isolated, their fleets fragmented. Calvrek glanced at General Czar, who had been summoned to the summit for his historical perspective. The aged warrior leaned back in his chair, a faint air of vindication in his posture. "They adapt," Czar said, his voice carrying the weight of his years. "Humans don't need centralized control. Give them a goal, and they'll find a way. They share information faster than we can comprehend. Their networks, their minds, they're a swarm." The younger general scoffed. "A swarm? We have crushed swarms before." Czar's eyes narrowed. "This is no mindless swarm. Each human is a node, thinking, analyzing, improvising. You cut off one head, and another takes its place. You don't understand what you're facing." Calvrek hesitated before speaking. "What do you suggest, General?" Czar's gaze swept the room. "Stop underestimating them, or prepare for your extinction." The plan that changed the war. On the bridge of the Resolute, Commander Hale studied a holographic display of Velaxian fleet movements. Her officers stood at attention, awaiting her orders. "They're falling back," said Lieutenant Arun, her tactical officer, "fortifying key systems along their border." Hale nodded, her sharp eyes scanning the data. "Good. They think we're going to engage them head-on. They haven't learned yet." The crew chuckled, a grim but determined sound. Hale turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel to Fleet Command." The holographic display shifted, revealing Admiral Tobias Klein. His grizzled face and cybernetic arm were familiar to every officer in the United Nations Space Corps. "Hale," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Report." "They're pulling back to their strongholds," Hale said. "I recommend we avoid direct engagement and instead escalate disruption tactics. Target their logistical infrastructure. Starve them out." Klein nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That's the kind of thinking we need. I'll authorize your request. Deploy teams to key sectors. Keep them guessing." Hale straightened. "Understood, sir. One more thing. Permission to deploy Omega Protocol." Klein's expression darkened. "Omega? You're serious?" "Deadly serious," Hale replied. "If they're falling back, they're consolidating resources. We need to break their morale." Klein's silence hung heavy before he finally gave a curt nod. "Do it, but be prepared for backlash. The saboteurs." Omega Protocol was humanity's most audacious weapon. Small, stealthy infiltration teams equipped with advanced exosuits and AI-guided tools. These operatives could slip through even the tightest Velaxian defenses. One such team, codenamed Spectre, infiltrated a Velaxian fuel depot orbiting a gas giant. The depot was a sprawling, organic structure, its living walls pulsing faintly as they processed raw materials. Captain Ria Cortez led the team, her suit's camel field shimmering as she moved through the shadows. "Status," she whispered, her voice transmitted directly to her team's comms. "Defenses minimal," replied Sergeant Oren, crouched beside a console. "They're not expecting intrusions at this level." "Good," Cortez said. "Plant the charges." Quietly, the team moved with precision, placing compact antimatter explosives at critical points. As Cortez set the final charge, a faint sound caught her attention, the clicking of Velaxian mandibles. "Contact," she whispered. 2:00. "Keep it silent." A shadow moved in the corridor. Before the Velaxian sentry could react, Cortez lunged, her blade flashing. The alien collapsed without a sound. "Charges set," Oren reported. "Fall back," Cortez ordered. "Detonation in 3 minutes." As the team exfiltrated, the depot erupted in a brilliant explosion, the shockwave rippling through the gas giant's rings. Across Velaxian space, similar strikes crippled fuel depots, munitions factories, and command centers. The message was clear. Humanity was not merely defending itself. It was dismantling the Velaxian war machine. The cost of underestimation. On the Velaxian homeworld, High Command was in chaos. Reports flooded in. Supply shortages, fleet desertions, and increasing dissent among their ranks. The humans had weaponized their very strategy, turning Velaxian strength into a liability. In his quarters, General Zar read the latest dispatches. He couldn't suppress a bitter smile. The humans were doing exactly what he had warned. Waging a war of attrition, exploiting every weakness. Calvrek appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "General, the humans have struck again. 3 of our border worlds have fallen. High Command is considering negotiations." Zar raised a mandible, silencing him. "You should have considered negotiations before you fired the first shot." "They won't stop," Calvrek admitted. "What do we do?" Zar stood, his joints creaking. "You pray they leave you something to rebuild. And if they don't, you accept the consequences." The rallying cry. In a broadcast that echoed across the stars, Commander Hale spoke directly to the Velaxian people. Her voice was calm, but her words carried the weight of a storm. "We did not seek this war, but you brought it to us. Now, you see what happens when humanity is pushed to the brink. We will not stop. We will not falter, surrender, or face the consequences of your arrogance." The message spread like wildfire across Velaxian space. Cracks began to form. Soldiers questioned their orders. Civilians demanded an end to the bloodshed, and humanity prepared for the final push. Chapter 3. The Fall of Velaxian Pride. The Voracis, once the jewel of the Velaxian fleet, drifted silently in the void, its organic hull pocked with scorch marks. Inside, strategist Calvrek sat at the command console, surrounded by panicked officers. Reports came in rapid bursts, each one worse than the last. "Outposts Theta and Gamma have fallen," an officer stammered. "The humans bypassed our defenses entirely." Calvrek's claws trembled as he stared at the holographic map. Red human ships now dominated territory that had been Velaxian for centuries. The front lines were collapsing, and there was no clear path to recovery. He turned to his communication officer. "Open a channel to High Command. I need reinforcements immediately." The officer hesitated, her multifaceted eyes glimmering with unease. "Strategist, High Command is unresponsive." Calvrek's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Unresponsive? What do you mean?" "They've gone silent. Our last transmission, reported heavy human incursions near the capital. Calvrek felt his carapace tighten with dread. If the humans had reached the capital system, it was only a matter of time before the Velaxian Empire fell. A knife in the heart. On the human flagship Vanguard, Admiral Tobias Klein watched as his fleet prepared for the final assault. The Velaxian homeworld, Valaris Prime, loomed on the main display, a green and gold sphere cradled by the light of its twin suns. Once, it had been a symbol of strength and unity. Now, it was the last domino waiting to fall. "Admiral," Commander Hale said, stepping onto the bridge. "The fleet is in position. We're ready to begin." Klein nodded, his expression grim. "No unnecessary casualties. Target military installations, orbital defenses, and key infrastructure. Spare the civilian sectors, if you can." "Yes, sir," Hale replied. "But if they resist, then we show them why they should have listened to Tsar," Klein said. His cybernetic arm tightened into a fist. Begin the assault. The storm unleashed. Valaris Prime's orbital defenses were formidable. Dozens of massive bioorganic platforms, bristling with weapons, supported by Velaxian warships. But the humans had learned from decades of fighting in the void. Their ships moved with precision, deploying EMP strikes and coordinated fire to neutralize Velaxian weapons before they could fire. The Resolute led the charge, weaving through the debris as its railguns ripped apart Velaxian hulls. Hale stood on the bridge, her voice sharp as she issued commands. "Fire at will. Focus on their command ships. We're breaking their spine." Explosions lit up the darkness as Velaxian defenses crumbled. Human ships pushed forward relentless, like wolves closing in on a wounded prey. On Valaris Prime, panic erupted in the streets. The once proud cities were thrown into chaos as news of the orbital assault reached the surface. Civilians fled into subterranean shelters, their chittering cries filling the air. But no shelter could protect them from the inevitable. The General's Gambit. In a fortified bunker beneath Valaris Prime, General Tsar stood before a council of terrified officials. The room was filled with the sound of frantic debates, but Tsar remained calm. He had seen this before. He had warned them, and now all his predictions had come true. "We must negotiate," Tsar said firmly, silencing the room. "The humans have already won." A high-ranking diplomat clacked her mandibles in defiance. "Negotiate? They will demand complete surrender." Tsar leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. "Then we surrender. Better to live under their terms than to perish in our arrogance." Before the council could respond, the room shook violently. Dust and debris rained down as another human bombardment struck the planet's surface. Tsar turned to an aide. "Get me a line to the human fleet. Now." The terms of surrender. The holographic display in the Vanguard's war room flickered to life, revealing General Tsar. His scarred face and worn armor were a stark contrast to the pristine uniforms of the humans who stared back at him. "I am General Tsar of the Velaxian High Command," he said. "I speak for what remains of my people. We request an immediate ceasefire." Admiral Klein studied the alien for a long moment before replying. "Surrender is your only option. Unconditional." Tsar's mandibles twitched. "We will comply. But I have one request." Klein raised an eyebrow. "You're not in a position to make demands, General." Tsar's voice softened. "This is not a demand. It is an acknowledgement. You warned us about humans. I warned my people about humans. And now we have learned. Do what you must, but I ask that you allow my people to live." Klein's expression remained unreadable. After a long pause, he nodded. "Your people will live, but you'll answer for this war. Zar bowed his head. Thank you. Epilogue. Lessons learned. Months later, Velaxian space was under human administration. The war was over, and humanity had emerged victorious, but at a cost. Entire colonies lay in ruins, countless lives lost on both sides. On Valaris Prime, Zar watched as human engineers worked alongside Velaxian laborers to rebuild the shattered cities. He had been stripped of his rank and confined to his home, but he bore no resentment. Instead, he observed the humans with a sense of awe. They do not conquer, he said to himself. They rebuild. Even after all we did, they do not hate us. From orbit, Commander Hale observed the surface of Valaris Prime through the viewport of her ship. Think they'll try it again? Lieutenant Arun asked. Hale shook her head. Not any time soon. They've learned. And so have we. The war had changed them all, but one truth remained. Humanity's strength was not in its technology, its numbers, or even its strategy. It was in its ability to endure, adapt, and rebuild. And that was a lesson the galaxy would never forget. Humanity's shadow. Years passed, but the scars of the human-Velaxian War remained etched across the stars. The Velaxian Empire, once the most dominant force in its sector, had become a shadow of its former self. Their fleets were dismantled, their colonies overseen by human administrators, and their leaders brought to trial for their crimes. Yet, amid the ruin, seeds of something new began to grow. The Council of Unity, on Valaris Prime, in the very chamber where Velaxian High Command had once plotted their conquest, a new gathering took place. The room had been transformed, its grandeur stripped down to practicality. Velaxians sat side by side with human diplomats, their expressions guarded but no longer hostile. General Zar, no longer a prisoner but an advisor, stood at the edge of the room, observing quietly. His worn carapace and scarred features were a living testament to the cost of arrogance and the price of survival. At the center of the gathering, Commander Victoria Hale addressed the room. She wore no medals or regalia, only the plain, utilitarian uniform of a United Nations Space Corps officer. Yet her presence commanded respect. Today, Hale began, her voice steady, we are not here to dwell on the past, but to ensure a future where war is no longer inevitable. Humanity knows the pain of division. We've torn ourselves apart more times than I care to count. And each time we rebuilt, not alone but together. Her gaze swept the room. The Velaxian people have suffered. So have we. But if we can move forward united, then this galaxy will become something greater than either of our species could achieve alone. A murmur rippled through the room. Some Velaxians clicked their mandibles in cautious agreement, while others remained silent. Zar stepped forward, drawing the attention of both sides. I once saw humans as monsters, Zar said, his deep, gravelly voice resonating through the chamber. Creatures of chaos and destruction. But I was wrong. You are more than your wars. You are builders, thinkers, survivors. And we must learn from you. He turned to his own people. If we cling to our pride, we will wither and die. But if we embrace change, if we work with these humans, we may yet thrive again. A fragile peace. Across Velaxian space, signs of recovery emerged. Human and Velaxian engineers worked side by side, rebuilding cities, restoring infrastructure, and replanting devastated ecosystems. It was not a utopia. Old wounds and resentments lingered, but it was a start. On the frontier, human settlers began returning to colonies once lost to Velaxian attacks. They rebuilt homes, erected memorials to the fallen, and planted crops in the ashen soil. Children played under reconstructed domes, their laughter a defiant echo of humanity's resilience. In orbit above Valaris Prime, Commander Hale and General Zar stood together on the observation deck of the Resolute. The planet spun below them, its green and gold surface marred but healing. "Do you think we'll ever truly trust each other?" Zar asked, his tone contemplative. Hale crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on the planet. "Trust takes time, but we've taken the first step. That's more than I ever thought possible when this war started." Zar's mandibles twitched in what passed for a Velaxian smile. "You are a strange species, Commander. You fight like demons, but you heal like caretakers." Hale smirked. "We've had a lot of practice. A lesson remembered. Far from Velaxian space, in the halls of the United Nations Space Corps headquarters on Earth, Admiral Klein gave a speech to a room filled with cadets. Behind him, a massive display showed images from the war. The burning skies of Caliban III, the ruins of Valaris Prime, and the first joint human-Velaxian relief effort. "War is not a thing to glorify," Klein said, his cybernetic hand resting on the podium. "But it teaches us lessons we must never forget. We fought the Velaxians because they underestimated us, because they saw us as weak. And we won not because we were stronger, but because we refused to give up." He paused, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "But remember this, victory is not the end. What we do after the war, how we build the peace, that is what defines us." The cadets rose to their feet, saluting. Klein nodded, his expression somber but proud. Echoes across the stars. As time passed, the human-Velaxian war became a cautionary tale, shared across the galaxy. Other species watched, some with fear, others with admiration, as humanity continued to expand, not as conquerors but as partners. In the depths of space, on an uncharted world, a Velaxian scout team discovered a small human memorial. It stood alone in the wilderness, a simple obelisk inscribed with words in both languages. "We remember not the war, but the lessons it taught us. Together, we endure." The Velaxian leader of the team paused to study the words, his mandibles clicking softly. "Perhaps the old stories were right," he murmured. "Humans are not just survivors. They are something more. Far away, beneath the vast canopy of Earth's night sky, Commander Hale stood on a quiet hill, watching the stars. She knew humanity's journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope.